Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Well, good morning again. Welcome back. Let's go around and say our names. Jim?
Terry?
Mike.
John?
Bob. George. Roger. Carl.
Paul?
Will. Clint.
Ed?
David.
Larry? Jack?
Michael. Snake. Peter. Jim. Steve. Bob. Artie.
Great. Anyone here for the first time? Oh,
Visiting from Vancouver.
great. How'd you hear about it?
Oh, I've been following the website and newsletters, and I've always wanted to come down for one of the retreats, and I've kind of never made it. So since I was coming to the city, I just had to be here today, and I'm a Tibetan practitioner, so it's an auspicious week. So welcome.
And we're fortunate to have Losang Monlam, who is the spiritual practice director of the, how do you say this?
Tse Chen Ling.
Tse Chen Ling Center for Tibetan Buddhist Studies. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Oh, you need to watch.
I need to watch, yeah. I take over on this. Thank you. Okay. When I was asked to talk, to return, I mentioned that there were two subjects. One was the nature of the mind, and the other one was death and dying. And so I've actually decided to talk about death this morning for you. It's one of those topics that is somewhat, from a Buddhist perspective, we like to deal with it. But from a cultural perspective, we'd like to avoid the whole topic altogether. I think in our community we've had to deal with it for a number of years, quite honestly and openly. But I just wanted to share a few things from the Buddhist perspective, especially from the Tibetan Buddhist perspective. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, but it does go into quite a bit of detail about some of the Tibetan Buddhist perspective about dying and the process of dying. And I thought maybe I could share a little bit of that with you. And in my lineage or tradition, we have what we call the 9 points of death, and we meditate on these points. And I guess the important part here is just to remember that we do. I guess the main sections here that death is certain. Everyone's going to die. There's no one that escapes. If we look through history, we don't find anyone that got out of having to die. No matter how much money you have, no matter how famous you are, everyone's got to go there. So it is certain. It's getting closer. It's an hour closer than it was an hour ago for all of us. Each breath we take, we're getting closer to the end. So we like to look at it just to understand that it's there in front of us, Another perspective is that the time of death is actually uncertain. There's no guarantee that we'll live to be 90, 100 years old. No, everyone dies at different ages. So, and I think, we have some experience around this, that there have been members of our community who died, and it's not at a certain age. And there are many causes of death. And we all have to kind of face it at some point. So the time of death is uncertain. And then the last kind of main section we look at is what is really going to help us at the time of death. And here we kind of reflect on the things that we kind of hold to be important in our lives. And one of them is, of course, our family and friends. And even at the time of death, they can't help us. They can be there. They can help us let go, maybe. But they're not going to die with us. We're going to have to do that process all on our own. So even our family and friends who are very important to us now can't really help us in that actual dying process. Our possessions, all of those things that we've kind of accumulated over the years, those too we will have to let go of. They will not help us. No matter how much money you have, it's not going to be any different for Bill Gates than it is going to be for you or I in terms of our possessions. In fact, sometimes possessions can get in the way at the last moment of death. If one is grasping, has a lot of anger about letting go. And even at the end, our body can't help us. So we look at that and we try to understand that, this body that we spend so much time taking care of, the clothes we buy, going to the gym, the foods we eat, all this attention focused on this body. But in the end, even that is going to fail us. We will have to die. So we look at these things, we try to meditate on them, because if we get some familiarity with the fact that we're going to die, and in this process of dying, we can get over a lot of our fears. And we can also put into perspective maybe how we live our life. Because the important part here is the moment of death. From a Buddhist perspective, that moment of death actually has a very strong impact on where you will be reborn for your next life. So all the fears that arise, the anger that might arise, those things we want to deal with ahead of time, so that we can actually have a peaceful, happy state of mind at the time of death. Because that will be very, very, very beneficial. So we look at it and we try to deal with it while we're still in this kind of situation, in meditation. We look at our fears, and these are all going to be different for each one of us. So we remind ourselves that we're going to die, and that's the purpose. We remind ourselves that we're going to die. We could die, this could be the last day of my life. There's no guarantee. So you look at that, and then you put things into perspective. You start to look at the things, the relationships you have. Are there difficulties in those relationships? If you were going to die tomorrow, would you have anything to do with your relationships in terms of saying goodbye, forgiving, or being forgiven? Those kind of situations. So you look at that. Do you have regrets? Are there some actions in your life that really trouble you? Things that you might have done that you're not so proud of? I think we all have things that have happened or we've done in our life that we would like to look at. So we deal with this process of letting go, not beating ourselves up, forgiving ourselves, so that at the moment of death our mind is peaceful. So do we have regrets? If we're going through life, we're not looking at that at all. Until maybe it's very difficult to deal with them because it's too late. So we remind ourselves, yes, today could be the last day of my life. What is important to us? It helps to keep us in perspective. For example, that argument you got into with your friend or your family member or your co-workers. How important is that? what is your perspective if you were going to die tomorrow? How much would you hang on to that conversation, that fight, that argument, that discussion? It would change your perspective a bit, right? So, I mean, ultimately, we talk about things being empty from their own side, but it's kind of important to kind of reflect on that. That even those arguments, those discussions, those things that get us upset, even those only have the meaning that we impute upon them. So we reflect on death and dying in this process. We look at our fears. Simplistically stated, death is not much more than going to sleep at night. The same process that happens at the time of death as the senses shut down is no different than when the senses shut down when you go to sleep at night. And the mind continues one moment after the next. Of course, you wake up and you're in a different body. That's a bit different. But the process itself is not that much different than going to sleep at night. But yet, it's on another level, emotional level, and because of our habits, it is difficult. It's not so easy to say goodbye. It's not so easy to let go of our relationships, our possessions, our careers. All these things that we have come to use to identify who we are, in whatever aspect that might be. They become kind of our persona, and eventually we do have to let them go. I'd like to next maybe do a meditation here on the death dissolution process. This is rather unique, I think, in the Tibetan tradition. I haven't seen it in any of the other traditions covered in this level of detail. And it's basically a meditation of how the senses shut down and what happens. And it's from a tantric point of view, so we have the winds and channels involved. And down to the point where the consciousness separates from this body, which is, from a Buddhist perspective, is the moment of death. It's a little bit different than the Western scientific point of view of death, which says when you stop breathing, that's when you're dead. In the Buddhist perspective, it's actually when your consciousness leaves the body. And that process can take up to 3 days. Generally, probably not with most of us, will take that long. There are some things around that we can talk about at the end of the meditation. But there is this process of shutting down, and maybe we'll just do a meditation here, and I'll guide you through that process, and then we can see at the end. I'll save some time for questions or discussion. Okay. Just take a couple minutes to focus on your breathing, and then I'll guide you through the meditation. Use your own basis of experience in following the meditation. imagine yourself, you're at home, and all of a sudden you start to feel some chest pain. It becomes quite intense, and the next thing you know, you've fallen slightly unconscious. You begin to come to a bit, and your partner's there. The emergency medical technicians are there, putting you on a stretcher. Calling you away to the hospital. You can't even speak. Your partner's upset. There's nothing you can say to them. It's all happening so fast. It's almost like a dream. We'll put you in the back of the ambulance. Get you to the emergency room. The doctors, machines checking you out. Soon you're taken to a side room. The nurses and doctors come about, but you can tell from their faces. It looks very serious. You're going to die. Your partner comes in. Family, friends hold your hand, visibly upset. It wasn't supposed to happen this way. Not this fast. Not today. Yet there's no way you can respond. You're going to die. The earth element dissolves, loss of physical power. The process has begun. Your limbs become thin and weak. Your body feels like it's sinking into the earth, as if being crushed by a great weight. It is difficult to move the eyes. The vision becomes blurry. The color of one's body fades. One has a mental image of a mirage. You're dying. The water element dissolves. Loss of feelings. The mouth becomes dry. The fluids of the body dry up greatly. Sweating ceases. One's feelings of pleasure, displeasure cease. One's hearing ceases. Even the sound of the ringing in your ear is no longer there. One has an inner vision of smoke. The fire element dissolves. Loss of discrimination. One can no longer recognize the faces or remember the names of close and loved ones. They are no longer relevant in your process of dying. The hands and feet begin to feel extremely cold. All digestion ceases. You're dying. Your sense of smell is finished, goes away. Your inhalation becomes weaker. Your exhalation becomes more long and drawn out. You're dying. One has a mental image of sparks. The wind element dissolves, loss of volition. One can no longer move one's limbs. The purpose of this life, one's work, one's friends, one's family, are forgotten. Sense of touch and taste cease. One takes one's last breath. The tongue turns blue and contracts. One has a vision of a dim light at the bottom of a well. The last thoughts now cease, and one's level of consciousness grows much more subtle. The winds above the heart and the right and left channels ascend to the crown. The white drop starts its descent down the central channel. One has a vision of a clear empty sky filled with the light of the full moon. The winds in the right and left channels below the heart descend and enter the central channel at the base. The red drop begins to descend up the central channel. One has an inner vision of a clear empty sky filled with the rays of a red sunset. As the white drop and the red drop meet at an indestructible drop at the heart, one has a black vision as if fainting or and momentary loss of consciousness, complete black. From this blackness comes the clear light of death. Brilliant, clear light, the nature of mind itself. Its most brilliant aspect. Meditate on this clear light. Stay there as long as you can. Pristine awareness. Surrender. relax. From this clear light of death, the process reverses itself, and finds oneself in what we call the bardo, or intermediate state, where one can reside up to 49 days, waiting to take rebirth into one's next life. The moment of death is very, very important. It determines really where you will be kind of perfected into your next life. So the state of mind at the time of death is very, very critical. What sometimes can happen is that if you haven't really kind of reflected at all on death, it can be a very time filled with great fear, a mind filled with great fear, or attachment, a strong attachment to one's friends and family arises at the time of death. But more than that, there's fear and anger. It's very, very difficult. But it is a continuation. I guess maybe open it up for some discussions and questions. Yes?
When the conscious mind re-enters into a new incarnation, is it present for the development of the next mind, within the mind of Bruein?
It enters into, at the moment of the sperm and egg coming together, the consciousness attaches itself to that. The most subtle consciousness. This is how it's explained in Tantra. And the consciousness itself is nothing more than one moment followed by the next. So it's called a continuum. So it's not like a new mind is created, it's just one moment following the next. It's formless. But yeah, it does enter at the moment that the egg and sperm come together. Yes.
My question is a little more, is it present through the development? Is it conscious of its own development into a new body, into a new mind?
To a certain extent, yes.
That's the object of its contemplation at that point.
Well, I mean, it probably feels like it's in a dark cave and things like that. I mean, I don't know how... the senses don't... The gross senses that we have now don't completely develop, and they start to develop in that process of gestation, but you wouldn't be aware of them so much until a certain point, and then you would. I mean, you do feel the birth process, things like that, but you don't have all the sense faculties. Those do come during the process, but they're not all there at the moment of conception. So you have to remember, it's more like a dream state, because like when our senses shut down when we go to sleep, that's more like what it would be like, because we don't have a strong sense of a body at that point. And that's really kind of what the bardo is like, and I think the early stages, because we kind of have all of our experiences based on these senses, because they're so real for us. But when you start to shut them down, you have a different level of experience. Yes.
About an easy death versus a hard death, and how that affects your next life. One of the Buddhist teaching that goes into great detail about that. I mean, if you have like an easy death where you prepare for it and so on, are you more conscious of directing yourself towards your next life? Is that the teaching? And a hard death means there's less control, there's less consciousness involved in it.
To a certain extent, I'm hoping at least just to be able to have a peaceful mind at the moment of death. Whether I'd ever get into being able to control that process I'd be very shocked if my practice developed to that level. But it is possible, and certainly the Tibetans have done it, and this is particularly appropriate in terms of practitioners in the tantric practice, because what they do with the highest level of tantric practice is called generation and completion stages, which completion stages are meant, they're kind of symbolic visualization methods meant to prepare you for the time of death so you can guide yourself through this process. Okay? And it's a question of familiarity. If you do this practice every day, then maybe by the time death arrives, you'll be familiar with it to be in the process to be able to control that. And then we have generation stages, which is really about coming back, generating yourself as a Buddha, shall we say, I guess. Those are very, very difficult practices, but they are meant to control that process. And in the Tibetan tradition, I mean, certainly we do have a lot of Rinpoches or Tulkus, those who have guided themselves through the process. But it's not particularly that easy. I do think, personally, that if you have a peaceful mind and you allow yourself to kind of just to surrender yourself to the process, you will be safe in terms of getting a good rebirth. I mean, it is said for us, I mean, and this may be just being something out of devotion or faith, it depends on how you look at it, but that if you have refuge in the Buddha, for example, at the moment of death, if you can remember that, and it's kind of like, or in your teacher, then you will be protected. You don't have to worry. You may not be able to guide the process very well. I don't know. I mean, I think it's very, very difficult to guide the process.
The guided process would be what they refer to as polo.
No, that's a little bit different. That's transference of consciousness.
This is something that
you can also develop that practice, yeah.
Well, anyway, I'm far from developing that practice, but I found that during your guided meditation, I sort of just instinctively slipped into the recitation of the mantra of Amitabha Buddha. And I was wondering if that would be desirable and how long one could continue that in the process.
I think it depends on your practice during your life. Because this is the whole point, I think, too, in not only just reflecting on the fact that we're dying and coming to terms with it and getting over our fears and attachments. The end result is for us to start practicing. Because what we do now, even, everything is generated by habit. You know, the foods we eat, the people we see, the way we see and interpret our experience. It's all a matter of habit. So the point here is to prepare ourselves with practice so that at the time of death, as we're going through this process, we do have habits built up that will automatically kick in because we've just become so familiar. And one of them would be maybe a particular mantra, maybe a particular deity, Chenrezig, could even be Mother, Mary, you know. This is what they explain in Tibetan Book of Living and Dying. It doesn't actually, have to be just Buddhist in all of this stuff, It really, and it is said, and I think this is nurses and stuff who deal with people who die have said that usually the people who have some spiritual tradition, no matter what it is, have an easier death process. And I think partly, to me at least, it seems like, I just like at some point let go of all my fears and just trust and surrender to that process and just let it unfold. I mean, that's my kind of thing. Yes.
Kind of wanted to share an experience I had last summer with a traumatic car accident. My experience was that I was driving north on 101. The next minute, or my next memory, was of being awakened by the emergency people. What had happened? I had a car accident. I'd been hit and knocked out, but had no experience or no memory of any of that. I was taken to the emergency room, and just so my experience was like the next couple of hours just laying strapped to a backboard in this emergency room. I became just intensely aware. And my usual personality just was sort of hardly there at all. And sort of as the hours or time went by, I was just filled with this intense gratitude, and I sort of felt like this was like a dry run in a way. And so I feel grateful for seeing that experience, that my practices were there to support me. Because it was a positive experience. It wasn't bad at all.
Good. That's very good. Thank you for sharing that. Because I think, there's a lot of people actually have experiences that have brought them pretty close, certainly, to the edge and stuff. And I know, Jim, we volunteered at the hospice here, so we had some experience of working with people who are dying and things.
Of course, the other realization that death really can happen just like that.
It does make you think about how you're living your life, right? And what your priorities are. Yeah. Yes.
In the meditation, when we talk about surrendering to the light and pure mind, I think I'd always thought about that as a moment of emerging. Yet in continuing the meditation, there's meditation. There seems to be a discreteness that doesn't, at least if my assumption that there's a melding and merging that occurs with the mind, the discreteness that continues after that into the rebirth doesn't make sense to me. So maybe my supposition about the melding and merging isn't valid. Could you talk a little bit?
Okay, the clear light of death. I talked to Geshe about this. The way it's explained is there's this clear light of death, and then there's which is a little bit slightly different than the clear light of emptiness. But if you can remain in the clear light, it's like having a direct realization of emptiness, which is cutting the root of ignorance, which is enlightenment, I guess. But you have to be able to. You have to have stabilized yourself, your meditation practice, to stay there. The problem is most of us don't stay there. We all have this. It is the thing about death is it is our opportunity to become enlightened, if we can kind of grasp what that means. And it is kind of about what you're talking about. It's staying with that clear light. But there's a little bit of slight difference that Geshe was explaining with. Because we can have the realization of emptiness and merge the mind with this realization of emptiness. They have to become non-dual. And that's not, it's real subtle. Even intellectually, conceptually understanding that non-duality there between the clear light of mind and the clear light of death and mind. They have to be non-dual. Does that help a little bit? Because the mind is just this continuum of moments, and it's this experience of clear light, which we're all going to go through, but most of us aren't stable enough in our practice to actually stay there.
In that moment of non-duality.
And actually create a moment of non-duality, yeah, in that mind of death, clear light of death. So we're still kind of, clear light of death, we still have subject-object kind of thing there going on. And that's really, it's a little bit difficult for me to talk about because in some ways it's even kind of beyond my ability to conceptualize, but I get from hearing the teachings of what it must be kind of like, but I don't have any direct experience of it for sure. Does that help though?
It helps to find a problem.
I think perhaps there's a difference in the Hindu and the Buddhist way of looking at it. I think there's an emerging, Vedanta Hinduism, I think they speak of emerging.
They have so...
You don't do that in Buddhism because there is nothing there to merge with.
Yeah. That's
not a continuum.
And yet something continues, but you'd have to get pretty heavy into Abhidharma at this point, with the Vajrayana and all that kind of stuff to distinguish the what continues after that experience. All of that.
Yeah, I mean, I
can't do it. I mean, I know.
Well,
I know
Geshe was talking.
I know
really
the subject, but I couldn't lay it out.
Geshe was really talking about this, and I don't have my notes here because we were talking about Ma, the mother, emptiness, and the clear light, mother light, clear light, and the clear light of death. He was distinguishing. So I was talking to him about some people who have this clear light experience, have near-death experiences, and actually have clear light, and we were distinguishing between that. Yes.
Is there any teachings on something? You know, if your body explodes in an accident or something, so that you don't approach death with a stately surrender of bodily functions.
No, Geshe, we talked about that a little bit. Because this came up in the classes, for the most part, this is more valid if one has kind of a death process. I had originally been taught that it happens in all cases, but Geshe did say that no, it doesn't necessarily happen all this in this order. And I was told originally that it happened, but very quickly. But he clarified that a bit and said no, it doesn't necessarily. All those steps don't necessarily have to happen.
One more question.
It's an integral view across various traditions and different thoughts and different philosophies over many, many decades, and the experience of lots of people who are in these traditions and have written them down or experienced them, is that there's a possibility of something spectacular, wonderful, marvelous, absolutely extraordinary, and at the same time very mysterious. There's general agreement on that in a lot of the traditions.
Oh, I think death is can be a very wonderful experience. This is, in all the traditions, this is the moment for liberation. But we got to be there before we get there.
Just to clarify, what happens in the Mahayana tradition with a bodhisattva at that stage? They go into...
They would be a Mahayana practitioner. If you're a bodhisattva, would automatically take rebirth so their mind would be motivated not to stay, would be motivated to take rebirth in a whatever beneficial form that might be in the next life. But there is a slight difference between the Mahayana Mahayana approach to what we call liberation and then what we call enlightenment. Liberation is the removal of the obscurations, of the afflictive obscurations. Enlightenment is the removal of the obscurations to knowledge. So there's a distinction between those.
Just one last look at guides. Is there guidance in this level, or are we really on our own?
For
the death process? Is there guidance of celestial beings?
Oh, if you have a relationship with a teacher, yes. Yes. They should be, a qualified spiritual master should be able to help you, even from a distance. If you have that guru, student-disciple relationship, they should be able to, a qualified one. They should. Okay. Anyway, thank you. I appreciate it.
Announcements. Harv is our host.
There is tea. The water can be very hot coming out of that, whatever it is, revolution or something. If you press the wrong button, you make bread instead of waiting. Please wash your cup. The cups are in the little cove there where the sink is, and please wash your cups and put them away. And let's even make the announcement about the Dana bowl. Is that right?
Go ahead.
There is a Dana bowl there. Please help. I think the cost for this room is something like a couple $100 at least, and costs of the newspapers and everything. So you ask if you can, a minimum of $5, 10, 20 would be very, very helpful. Of course, you're absolutely welcome here under any and all circumstances, and the teachings are free. So if it isn't possible to leave it. One other thought is all of the other sentient beings who like the crumbs from the cake, if you do drop crumbs around, please pick them up so that those sentient beings don't come in and thus not harm.
A couple things. Next week we'll have Noah Levine, who wrote the book Dharma Punk, and so it's very excited to have him back to once before. And this is the last time I'll make this announcement, I promise. But this Tuesday I'll have my book launching party at Incorporated on Market Street at 7:30 at night. I have flyers if anybody's interested. Love to have a good attendance at this thing. So you can push me up to look at the flyer.
David.
Paul asked me to say that 2 weeks from today is a fall Sangha meeting, and it'll just be sort of reflections on last year and what I think this next year.
And will that be after the meditation or after the social hour?
Yeah, I'm not sure how he's arranging. He's not here today, or he had to leave something to say.
Paul.
I answered the voicemail, and there's a man in western Kansas who's practicing Buddhist, who is feeling very isolated and would like to correspond or get to know someone by phone. And so I'm bringing that request here, and I have this phone number information. Someone would like to do that.
This Wednesday, the 10th at my house, which is 352 Waller, Marshall Corliss will be a discussion about his book, Visions of Buddhism. And if you need further information, please send me an address.
Roger.
Yes, I was very nice at the problem. Wasn't here, but thanks very much for that. But also, I have received a card for New Year for Losang from the people of Vajrapani, especially Amy, who looked after our retreat there. And I've brought the card with me, as you can look at it afterwards. She is no longer going to be the director. She's going to retreat for a couple of years or something, and somebody else will be taking over. So anyhow, she wishes, she has a short note with this to wish everyone with the GEDF best of luck, and so I thought I would share that with you. She sent a letter to all of GEDF, but it came to my house, so that's what I thought it would be. It'll be outside of the house.
Okay, let's stand and hold hands. Yes.
In San Francisco. I was just thinking about that. Just a moment of reflection here, and joy and rejoicing in taking this opportunity to practice together. It really is, this is what we mean by Sangha community. When we take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, it is about sharing with our fellow practitioners our practice, our way of viewing and seeing things, so we should rejoice. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.